Want to get a quick update on the mineral extraction study that we talked about. Talked about in December and also in January. And then Ben and Jim are going to give us an update on all the happenings with the legislature and kind of where we think that's going to go. And then to kind of wrap up the meeting today, I wanted to get the committee's input on, what you think the key topics should be, what agenda items should we focus on going forward. And I think the discussion before that will help inform that as well. So any other things anybody wants to add to the agenda? All right. Well, I think the first order of business is just, I sent out a summary of our meeting in January. Hopefully you had a chance to review that. I wondered if there were any comments or changes anybody wanted to make. Or a motion to approve that.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Greg. Second?
Second.
Second. All right. All right. All those in favor of approving the meeting summary as is, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay. All right. Motion approved unanimously. Thank you. All right. Well, let's jump into the agenda. Ryan, do you want to?
Christine will. Or do you want? I think it's.
Rulemaking.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Oh, that's what I was saying. So sitting. Yeah. Yeah. Not able to. Realizing not letting me.
Not letting you share.
Not letting me share. Those lessons we learned in kindergarten. There we go. Rocky bailed me out.
Oh, hey, Jeff. Maybe while we're waiting or at some point, I don't know. I went on the Great Salt Lake website, and maybe Tim, I don't know if you had anything to do with this, but I went on the Great Salt Lake website the other day, and now the lake level elevation, the current for North and South Arm is there. And there's like this whole thing about the salinity, and you can do all the conversions, it's all there. So I don't know if people, I think this group would be super interested in checking that out. So I was messaging with folks, and they're like, yeah, we just put the graph up like a half hour ago or something. So it's new, it's up, and there's a lot more information on the Great Salt Lake page now than there was a week ago. I think it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, Craig, Summer, Tom, and others. Really,
Laura, are you talking about the hydromapper? The hydromapper page?
Not hearing you, Bonnie.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're muted.
Bonnie, I can hear you. I just don't think they can hear you.
Oh, I was just wondering if we were talking about the hydromapper page, what Laura was talking about.
Yeah.
I'm
We're not
having-
hearing anybody online. We see you're talking, but speakers on. Maybe the chat.
Or is that on the?
We'll have to troubleshoot the audio here.
Now the commissioners website is like the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah, I'm talking.
Yeah, that's what you're talking. So.
Oh. All right, can somebody online try talking again?
greatsalt.utah.gov.
Mic check.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
I
Bonnie
just
here.
switched. Thank you. So Bonnie, you were trying to say something.
I was just asking if Laura was talking about the hydromapper page, but we handled it in the chat. So now I know what page we're talking about. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
All right, should we get going?
Yes.
All right, Christine's, so we'll get through this. We might go a little bit quick through this presentation. So we're gonna talk about our usual update, right? Lake elevations, discharge at the west crack, or excuse me, the new breach. And then Christine will take over the salinity update and a spring salinity forecast. So here's our lake elevation for the Saltair Boat Harbor, showing data from October 2021 to present. The most recent daily value is 4194.1. The seasonal low that we hit was on October 1st at 4192. So we're up 2.1 feet since the seasonal low in October. And I think we're sitting on a good snowpack. So there's some optimism. We're going to continue to see increasing lake levels out there. Here's the north arm gauge. So the gauge near Saline, Utah. Same time period shown, the most recent daily value, 4190.8. The seasonal low of this gauge was actually measured in September of 2023 at 4188.8 feet. So we're up 2 feet since that seasonal low in September. So both sites have come up about, both arms of the lake have come up about 2 feet. And as you all know, sitting on a good snowpack, and there's optimism for increasing lake levels. There's a 3.3 foot difference between the north and the south arms of the lake. So this plot, the south arm is shown the red line, and the north arm data is shown with the green line. And then you can see that most recent data to the far right of the plot, we have a 3.3 foot difference between those two gauges. Major surface water inflow gauge update. So the first plot is for the Bear River near Corinne. So I'm showing daily discharge in cubic feet per second on the y-axis. And we have data for the current water year shown by the blue line on the plot. And the median daily values for this period are shown with the orangish line. And so the blue line, this year's data, track the median values, and recently there's extended period where we're well above the median values measured at this gauge. So things looking normal to a little above normal or median, let's say, at the Bear River Corinne. The next plot is for the Weber River near Plain City, Utah. So same y-axis, daily discharge in cubic feet per second. Again, we're showing data for the water year in blue. And then the orange line again is the median based on the period of record at the gauge. So extended periods earlier in the water year where Weber River was flowing well above the median. We had a dip in January, but flows have increased since then, and we're now tracking the median, maybe even a little above the median. The next plot is for the Gog and Drain. Exact same type of plot. So the blue line has been tracking more or less with some spikes along the median. And most recently, the flows at Gog and Drain are well above the historic median for this site. There's a lot of water moving. So heading towards the lake, so that's great. And then finally, this is the Farmington Bay outflow at the Causeway Bridge. And the measured flows in the blue line have been tracking along the median quite nicely, with some periods here recently that are above the median. And this data is all available to you easily on the through the USGS in this system. In terms of cumulative flows of these gauges, so we're adding up the values and to come up with a value in millions of acre feet. So that's what we have on the y-axis. Current cumulative stream flow of millions of acre feet. It's a log scale, and we're showing a water year on the x-axis. The bold black line are data for this year. And the green zone is the 25th to 75th percentile. That little gray line in the green zone is the median, the 50th percentile. Then you see the blues, the max, and the orangish colors, the min. We're tracking right along the median at current, right? The data for the Weaver River near Plain City are shown on the next plot. And right now, for this point in the water year, we're right about at the median for this site in terms of how many acre feet of pass that gauge. We're right about at the median for this time of the year, maybe just a tad above. Dog and drain, where all that a lot of that Jordan River water is moving along. The most current data you see, our cumulative flow so far is above the 75th percentile for this time of year. So elevated flows for sure are resulting the overall volume water passing that gauge being above the 75th percentile. And then finally, Farmington Bay outflow at the Causeway Bridge. The black line, remember, is the data for this water year. So we're tracking right along the 75th percentile, even along the blue line, the highest measured for this time of year. So strong flows at that site as well. The new breach. So we have a rating in place now where we can provide real-time discharge values of the new breach. Previously in these meetings, I would show you our discrete measurements, the field technician actually measuring the values, and it was once a month that those measurements would be made. We've developed a rating for the site. It's acting like a broad crested weir. It's an empirical rating based on observed stage and observed measurements of discharge in the field. And the resulting continuous discharge record for the site is shown on this plot. So we have data going back to about June of 2023 out to current. And the y-axis is in cubic feet per second. And just below the plot to the lower right, we have the most recent field measurements of discharge. So on March 6th, the technician measured 1,540 CFS moving north to south. February 13th, 1,260 CFS was measured moving south to north. No flow, obviously, moving from that we can at least detect with our sensors. No flow moving through there from the north to the south. So it's all flow as we'd expect. This is just another view of that continuous discharge record. So the red line are the discharge values coming from the rating that was developed, and the red circles are the actual measurements of discharge made by the technician in the field. And I just want to point out that there's periods where the red line and the circle are not perfectly overlapping. This is getting to uncertainty in the rating. There's uncertainty with these field measurements of discharge. So these measurements, because the velocity field is it's non-standard at the breach where these field measurements of discharge are made. These velocity fields are non-standard. These measurements have a lot of uncertainty. We call them core measurements. That means they have an uncertainty of 8% and above. We don't have an upper bound on the above. That's to give us some wiggle room. Okay, but this is a work in progress. The rating will improve as we can. We are measuring velocity with an uplifter sensor, and we may bring that into this rating to help improve things. But this rating is not too bad right now. Okay, this is some very useful information that we're getting. So that's it for my part of the update. So if you have any questions on flows, these measurements made at the breach, should we just have those addressed now? Sure. Okay. Yeah. So if there's any questions for my part of the update, I'm happy to take those. Beautiful update. Thank you, sir. Now, Christine, the real science.
Briefly, yesterday, the NRCS talked about their forecast.
Oh, yeah.
You want to mention that? Or?
Yeah. So Jordan Clayton with NRCS is he's being very brave, and he's providing a forecast for Great Salt Lake elevations. Right. Good luck. Okay, and I think he's added a link to his webpage, and so Great Salt Lake level forecasts, And is he forecasting an additional 1 to 1.2 feet?
1.2 feet. Yeah, it's the median. That's what, of the risers. The upper level is 1.9, I think. And so, but yeah, he's predicting that 1.2. Additional rise from, I think,
It was March 1, started from March 1.
Yeah, so we've already come up 2 feet, and he's basically saying another 1.2 feet, right? Yeah, okay. So we'll see how that goes.
there is one data gap in, on the Plain City, that you saw that drop in January.
Yes.
They were moving water, down the canal to Willard Bay. And it was, those flows were essentially, they were their 60-day limit in Willard Bay. So those flows were essentially whatever was going in was coming out of the North Gate into the spur. So there's about 500 CFS, give or take, that was moving through just in and out of Willard into the lake. So just FYI.
Thank you. I wasn't certain why we had that low spike.
And we've been talking with Weaver Basin as well as with Ogden about getting that rated and getting a gauge basically on that North Gate so we know what's going out.
Very cool.
So just FYI. We really need to be figuring out how much is getting to the lake and when, figuring out where we're missing our targets. And yes, where are our targets too? But yeah, thanks for the presentation.
Okay. All right, on to salinity. The last time GSLAC was out and collected a sample was February 12th, so that's the most recent data we have. Here's a plot of salinity in grams per liter from starting in water year 2022, so water year 2023, so starting in October 2022 to present. And our surface salinities for this last round of samples ranged from 100 to 128 grams per liter. Our lowest, as you might expect, was at our site 2267, which is right where the Bear River comes in north of Fremont Island. So we're consistently seeing the most dilute salinities there. I will also want to point out from kind of this chunk of lower right text, those shallow salinities, that there's now a gradient in the water column. So there's most dilute conditions for salinities at the surface. At 3 meters, we're seeing salinities tick up a bit. So for example, at 3510, we go from 128 to 131. At 2565, that's our site in Carrington Bay, right up here. You can see my pointer a little bit. In Carrington Bay, that star in the northwest quadrant of the lake, we see surface salinities of 122 grams per liter, and then 3 meters down 130 grams per liter. So just seeing a gradual kind of gradient, more dilute to more concentrated at depth. And then relative to our high in October, our salinities then were 127 to 144 grams per liter. We've gone down 16 grams per liter at our site in Gilbert Bay, and down 21 grams per liter at our site in Carrington Bay. So seeing changes relative to October. If we put those values into our more historic context, you can see that we're kind of well within this supportive range that this committee has identified from 120 to 160 grams per liter. At depth, we see, as I mentioned, salinity even more, just this gradient that's developing as freshwater inflows are coming in. And we have a couple of other measurements of salinity at the new breach, 114 grams per liter as of March 6th. So even more dilute there. And I believe we're starting to see kind of this Bear River influence of it coming south of Promontory and through the new breach. So more dilute conditions there. I wish we had South Arm salinity measurements kind of around the same time of March 6th so we could directly compare, but we'll have to wait until we get into the samples. And then at Saltaire, we also saw measured 106 grams per liter on March 11th. So definitely seeing salinities coming down. This we're going to be close to the lake. Do you want me to just go into the forecast?
Andrew, did you measure anything?
Yeah, so we at Saltaire yesterday we measured ranging from about 97 to 104. So, and the north arm is well undersaturated. What is it? It's, so in density, it's about 1.194, which is well kind of below the 1.223 for saturation.
Okay, all right. Any questions on that stuff? Okay. Want me to keep going, Jeff?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so now we're taking another stab at this spring forecast. Just being transparent about the equation, very simple equation that is being applied here. Since February 12th is our most recent measurement of salinity, that's the point in time where I can calculate the south arm salt mass and kind of conduct this mass balance equation. So I basically take February 12th salt estimate of salt mass. I say, you know, what's been going through the breach, export to the north, both flow and the concentration of that water. And then I say what's coming in from the inflows, the reverse surface water inflows, and use that to calculate a concentration in the spring. With, of course, the volume in the spring being estimated in a similar way, starting volume of water in February minus what's left through the breach, minus what's left via evaporation, plus precipitation, and plus what's coming in on the inflows. I tried to get a little simple graphic here this time, so I don't have to look at equations. Our starting concentration as of February 12th was 130 grams per liter. That's our volume weighted concentration. At that time, we had around 6.4 million acre feet in the South Arm. So that's kind of our starting condition. And the variables that we modify or estimate in this exercise are the south to north discharge. I can calculate a rough mean for February since that's passed. That's around 1,250 CFS. And then I basically need to estimate what it's going to be moving forward. Ideally, maybe one day we can get a more dynamic model going where we can actually iteratively compute what that will be. But right now it's a guess. I'm applying to 2 different climate conditions, an average and a high or 90th percentile of precip and inflows. Breach salinities, something a little bit new in this iteration of the estimate is that I'm basically hardwiring in more dilute conditions at the breach. This is something we've observed consistently. And so each month I'm applying kind of a dilute salinity relative to the south arm, and then I'm ratcheting it down each month as well. And I'm holding inflow salinities constant at 4 grams per liter. This is based on an average. This could be refined and improved, but that's what I'm using at this point. And then just to remind you of the assumptions of these calculations, we're assuming that all freshwater inflow coming in is instantaneously fixed and is applied to dilute the salt mass there, which we know is not quite correct, but we don't have a hydrodynamic model to inform what rate of mixing is. And so with that, I'll just move on to the forecast. So this time around, I'm predicting it for June 30th. 2024. So this is my best estimate of what salinities will be on June 30th for 2 different conditions. The top row is for average precipitation, evaporation, and inflows. You don't have to go through. I just want to be transparent about all the assumptions I make in the calculations. That's what these rows are. I think what everyone's interested in is in the far right column. So with this average condition, the projected salinity is 119 grams per liter. And then the second row is the condition where we have 90th percentile of precipitation and 90th percentile of stream water inflows, or surface water inflows. So you can see there's a bit of a difference there, around 16 grams per liter. That's my best guess. I think we're somewhere in the middle here. And I'll point out that we're already, the projected lake elevation rise for the average condition, we're already there, which tells me we're going to be, above that and somewhere in between here and the 90th percentile. My best guess. Yeah. And I tried to loop in the NRCS forecast based on the lake elevation, based on the inflow volume that I compute and that they, based on their exceedance probabilities. So for the average condition, we're over 60% sure that our inflows are going to be greater than that. For the 90th percentile, there's a less than 10% chance that this condition, that we're going to exceed this condition based on the NRCS forecast. So, going on.
Great. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Well done. Any questions?
Any questions? And I did run these calculations by Bill Johnson. which I feel better about. He kind of gave his blessing on these things. And his thing is like, it's a very simple model. And big people actually observe this spring. It'll inform us, what factors we're missing, and just to be transparent, this is an iterative process. And every time I do this, I'm trying to think of ways to improve it. But there's many assumptions being made, and at some point we may need to just invest in a more comprehensive approach. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. No, it's great that I think NRCS is making those projections on inflow to the lake, or they're making them available. I think they've always had them, but they just haven't been used. Great to have that and be able to think that.
Free. That's really neat to compare.
Any other discussion on the salinity? I think the main point here is that we're below that 130 gram per liter target that we have for the spring. So it's great news. All right. Well, thank you, Christine. Marisa, can you give us an update on the modification study?
Sure thing. So since we last met, Forestry, Fire and State Lands, Division of Water Resources, USGS, as well as Jeff met to discuss how to best go about getting this study contracted with certain funding limitations. And so the conclusion is that we'll be contracting directly with USGS to complete this study. Currently that budget they are working on. So once we have that updated budget from them, an agreement, we'll be able to kick it off. But until then, it's pending. So more to come.
Great. Questions on that? I think that'll be an important step. Have that information available. Well, great. Well, let's move on then. Ben, take it away.
Yep, thanks. So I think I was going to try to encapsulate what we are doing on the rules now with new HB 453, and then last year HB 513, and then also how the berm plays into that as well. So I'll kind of just walk through what happened in 453, the significant actions, and perhaps how they're going to play with last year's 513. So overall, we're going to wait to submit our rules to DAR until we can incorporate this year's changes. We don't feel like it would be advantageous to anybody if we put the rules that we had proposed for 513 in, knowing that some of those things were encapsulated like in the statute, and then also there's going to be some. There was a little bit of a change of course and things that we learned over that time. So we're going to take the rules that we had proposed and dice those up a little bit. There's things that don't apply anymore because they're in statute. And then there's also those things that we need to add. Then likely do another public meeting, give everybody another chance to take a look at those and then have a chance to input. And then some of the, if we are on a streamlined process, I think we'd like to get those to the Division of Administrative Rules by May. So we are going to take a kind of an aggressive approach to getting those rules drafted. And I think that last year really kind of set a good base for where we're at. And it's not going to be as big of a lift as the rules were last year to get to that point. But in 453, so I'll just give you some of the main things that we're looking at. Some of these rules apply to us. Some of them will be with Teresa's shop, some with the tax commission and others. But from our perspective, this is kind of an overview of the big things that happened in 453. But there was the distribution plan. That's massive because we've never had a water distribution plan. It kind of takes diversions in the Great Salt Lake into the prior appropriation doctrine world. So they'll be subject to the same cuts that others are in the basin. So that modernizes that. It also established eminent domain. So our division can look at leased acres that are no longer viable and use eminent domain to reel back some of those leases. Establish a severance tax for all minerals that are extracted. And then it also allows for companies to enter into voluntary agreements. We actually have a term sheet that we've agreed upon with Compass so far that's you may have seen was announced in the news, but I think it's going to be when we're able to release all the details of the agreement, I think everybody will be pleased with what's in there. And we'll probably negate the need to use eminent domain because it kind of right sizes some of these police footprints and water rights. We really appreciate Compass coming to the table. We are working with US Magnesium and other mineral companies on the lake to try to get to a similar position that we have been able to get to with Compass. Those voluntary agreements also, there was an incentive for these companies to enter into these voluntary agreements from a severance tax perspective. As I mentioned, severance tax now applies to basically everything being extracted from the lake. However, if they can enter into a voluntary agreement, this HB 453 incentivizes them to do that by saying that it basically takes severance tax from being 7.8% on all minerals extracted down to 2.6% only for lithium. And then it's a little complicated. So above the elevations of 4198, it'd be 2.6% across the board, and below 4198, it would basically do away with severance tax on everything but lithium at a rate of 2.6%. So there's a massive incentive for these companies to enter into these voluntary agreements. And I think that, the goal there was to try to figure out a way to, incentivize, less depletions of the brines, some of the impacts that come along with that onto the lake. Let's see, we also have some statutory authorization now to require feasibility assessments. That was something that we kind of had some folks push back on in our rules, that maybe we didn't have the statutory authority to require that they demonstrate their process. That leaves us in a position now where they'll have to demonstrate that they're not harming the lake, that they're able to actually produce lithium. And so we feel like that's a great opportunity to make sure that there's no impacts. Also establishes that they need to enter into cooperative agreements. If we have new operators on the lake, we'll have a scenario where basically what we're asking is that they acknowledge that there are other operators and how they're going to be able to conduct business together without impairing the lake. So again, another thing that we had in our rules that now is in statute that I think is going to be advantageous. There's also another component of this adoption of innovative technologies, and there's also a whole waste concept too about how we make sure the state is fairly compensated for all the minerals that are extracted. So with both the innovative technologies for current operations and mineral extraction that potentially is wasting some of the state's minerals, both of those things were, I guess, further refined in the sense that now mineral companies will have a chance to, someone will have to demonstrate that that's viable and that it's kind of applicable to their operation. Because I think there's like one example I'd give is, US Magnesium has a completely different process than Compass Minerals, and to say that the way that US Magnesium has a byproduct of lithium in their waste pile, that now that would apply to like Compass Minerals, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because we don't necessarily want Compass Minerals to do what US Magnesium is doing and vice versa. Like there's going to be unique and distinct processes. So this gives a chance to make sure that that we're not forcing anybody to change their process in a way that may negatively impact the lake, and that it's a little more fair to both the companies and to the state and to the resource, to make sure we're doing the right thing for the lake as well. And then as far as the berm goes, so last year, as you all remember, the Salinity Committee made a recommendation that we weren't able to accept, because I think there were some questions about whether we were modifying the berm, in a scenario where it was already in the desired salinity range that we had established. And so there was some question about whether we should be modifying the berm when we're in that range. And so it was suggested that we ought to come up with some language that basically allows us to modify the berm, even when conditions are right, with that proactive nature of being able to say, we're looking forward to the future. We want to modify the berm proactively rather than reactively. So this allows us to do that. And what it does is it sets up a process, which I'm really pleased with the way it panned out, because I think it gives us a process, and now there's no questioning whether anybody's going to have any hard feelings about the recommendations. And I think it will allow our division to more easily accept the recommendations. So the process, basically, the way it lays it out is that when the Salinity Committee makes a recommendation, the recommendation will need to include some certain components to it. And that would be like when we would take the berm back down, and how we would, and with the goal of equalizing lake levels within 2 feet. It doesn't say we have to do it by a certain date, which to me was a big relief, because I think that's impossible. As you all know, there's limitations to what flows through the the breach. But what it does is it says, if we're at, if we wanted to raise it to like 4198 and let that mix, we also need to say when we're going to take it down and when the anticipated equalization of those lake levels would be. So some of this modeling that we're refining, all those things will help. And we can try to make an informed decision about how we do that. And then we need to make that, we need to loop in the commissioner's office and let them know what the plan is. And I think the purpose of that is like, you know, the governor issued an executive order, you know, to raise the berm last time. So this is obviously an important thing for the governor, for the legislature, others. Tim's shop can make sure that they're touching base with all those, because they certainly have their ear. So I think it's a good process, and we will, in our rule, we'll probably dive in a little bit on what that looks like, and then we can provide some guidance back, you know, what those recommendations might look like. It also establishes a floor of 4190 for the south arm. So if we get below 4190 in the south arm, it will trigger the berm to be raised automatically. Essentially, something that, you know, kind of creates that bottom threshold there. So I think that's also advantageous because it does kind of give that emergency, you know, response there. I think Jim will probably touch on this, but it does set a salinity standard for discharges. So DWQ will have some work to do on that. I hope that the salinity committee can engage with that as well. And then I already touched on waste, but that's going to be a, you know, big component there as well. And then the other thing that it did that's is it appropriated $500,000 for a berm study. Essentially, well, I shouldn't call it a berm study because I think the idea is that we move away from the berm and have something that's easier to model. So, you know, something that we can actually is a little more predictable. We don't have this big jagged surface area. And then also maybe something that's flexible on where we take the water from. I think this mixing has been such a big issue, and we have, you know, surface flows coming from the Bear River and, you know, kind of short circuiting going out. We're not getting the full dilution, or excuse me, full mixing. So now some of that dilute water. If there's opportunities to maybe look at pulling from like the, you know, the more dense brines in the south arm from the bottom and putting it into the north arm, and, you know, what that looks like, and kind of having a structural analysis of like what can we do that's maybe a little more adaptable, something we can move more frequently, so it's not just a big pile of rocks, and something more reliable, because we did blow out, you know, and with some really big rock last year. So I think the study will be an engineering analysis. I do want to suggest too, have a kind of a side discussion on that. You know, Jacobs, Jeff works for Jacobs and facilitates this meeting. I want to make sure that we don't rule out the ability for Jacobs to bid on something like this, because they truly do have a lot of knowledge and applicability to this. So I was hoping that rather than discuss this analysis here in this body, that maybe we could get a subset of folks that would be interested in working on that scope of work to see like what that looks like to join me on that. It's something I'd like to get released as soon as the funding becomes available. So if you are willing and have interest in developing that, if you could email me separately, I think that would be great to have some folks that would, you know, from this body that could help there. And that gives Jeff's shop the ability to have an outside perspective when they come into bid, so we don't have any conflicts of interest. So that, I think that's the majority of what I had. Like I said, 513, we're not going to set those rules or submit those to DAR until we get another public meeting, and the 453 rules incorporated into that. So we have a lot of work to do between now and then. We hope that those who are interested will engage when we get a new draft out. I know, you know, we've worked with water quality and others in this room to get it to that point. So hopefully everybody continues to be engaged, and then hopefully we'll have some rules shortly after this becomes effective. I think once we get into DAR, it takes a few months for them to go through their process, and then we can not touch these rules again for a minute. So anyway, that's all I had, unless anybody has any questions.
So I think water quality has until June 5 to adopt their salinity limit. And it's different than a salinity standard in that it doesn't have to go through the EPA for approval. But do you want to say anything else, Ben?
Yeah, or if you want me to, I can just segue into.
Well, I was going to say they're next on the agenda.
Oh, you're
talking about their rules. So
I don't.
Yeah,
need to read agenda.
No worries. But before we hop into that, does anybody have any other questions just in regards to overall 453 rules or 513? Well, maybe are you giving the update, Ben, or is Jim?
Yeah, I did have one. I was just curious on the distribution plan, on the links to cuts. Are those, and maybe Blake can answer this too, but is it two cuts that are made up in the basin?
I don't,
Like
Blake,
the,
I think that'd be great. Blake would want to answer that, but it's below the meander line and it has to do with lake elevations and salinity.
okay.
So I think that, Blake, correct me if I'm wrong, but my interpretation of that is it's going to be based on lake conditions and probably not as much directly related to the upper basin. Blake, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'll just add, yeah. So it's a good question. I think that's what's needs to be decided as we move forward with the distribution management plan. And I think those are some of the factors. I think that the statute explicitly states what we are to consider, but then also kind of leaves it open. But primarily it's going to be considering salinity conditions, lake levels, those types of things.
And it just, I should also mention too that this bill did appropriate some funding for them to be able to dive into this because they're working on similar distribution plans in other areas. And I think to get this done in a reasonable amount of time, they'll be able to hire a position for that or reallocate some.
I will just say there's nothing similar about this distribution plan compared to what we are accustomed to doing. But so this will be a new task for us, but yeah, it's going to be a heavy lift, but we're looking forward to getting started.
Yeah, because it's a pretty aggressive timeline for you guys, isn't it, Blake?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, 18 months to kind of knock this out, and typically where we've done, groundwater distribution management plans, those have happened over several years as we've negotiated and worked with stakeholders. So obviously, this is a pretty aggressive plan, but we're ready to dig in and get to work.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? John?
I don't have a question. I have a statement. Great job all around.
Thanks for my question.
Yes, thank you. All right, well, if there are no more questions for Ben Sireman, Ben Holcomb, Jim texted me, said he's sick, so you were stepping in for him.
Yeah, so we're nearing the finish line for our 513 rules. We went through the formal public comment process. We received some comments, so we're preparing formal responses to those. And then we're planning to take what we've got as a package to our water quality board next month, which is on April 24th. And at that time, we're anticipating that the board will approve that. And so we should be ready to go. I mean, fingers crossed. So it's been a stretch. So that's where we're at with the 513. The 453, we've been feeling it out a little bit. With some, I can share with you guys what's in the rule. Essentially, our timeline is June 2025. So this clause is nested in this distribution plan. So the distribution plan is due October or something along those lines. And our chunk is due June 1st of next year. So in consultation with state lands and in cooperation with the commissioner's office, we're to put together in rule the salinity or brine limit for a discharger to the lake as part of any kind of mineral extraction process. It's a little awkward because we don't normally put limits in rule. It's generally that's what goes into a permit, and permits are every 5 years, and they're updated to account for changing environmental conditions. And of course, the lake is like that is the epitome of changing environmental conditions. So it's a little awkward for us to figure out how we're going to do this, but we're looking forward to working with you all on writing some rule. And yeah, it'll be great because it's not just us and state lands. It'll be now us, the commissioner's office, and potentially the division of water rights, where we're all going to have to be thinking through how just some things to consider. So we've started looking at that internally and how this might play out, and we'd like to get kind of a straw straw person. Draft it up and then we'll share it with you guys and we'll just get the ball rolling because we got to start now. Because we have to go through a more formal process for rulemaking, has to go through our board, and so we need a bit more lead time to meet this deadline. Any questions? Okay, that's all from us.
All right. Well, there's a lot going on, lots of changes, and I think it's pretty exciting to see it. I guess the attention, maybe it's kind of a double-edged sword, perhaps, the attention that it's getting. But it's good to see the progress moving forward. And I think this committee will have an important role, I think, in helping provide recommendations. We talked about that last time in terms of what the role of this committee will be going forward. And I think it will have a very active role in helping provide recommendations to Forestry, Salinity, and DWQ on some of these things. So, well, good. Well, we're getting through things quickly, so we'll probably be done early today. One of the last thing I had on the agenda here, I wanted to just open up for discussion for all of you, was ongoing topics that we want to delve into here as a committee. I think some of the things that we've talked about in the past, I think a big topic that has consumed a lot of our time and attention has been trying to address the changing salinity that we've had in the last 2 years, the high salinities, and trying to evaluate how we estimate the salinity of the lake, the depth average or average salinity for the lake, South Arm. How do we incorporate that into the mass balance? How do we forecast the salinity? How do we use the berm to be able to manage that? And I think we've had a lot of very good, fruitful conversation about that over the last few years. The other topics that we've been talking about have been the long-term salinity management plan, and what are the remaining questions that we need to address there, and then of course the flow control structure at the bridge. And I think with that, as Ben said, Ben's going to address the flow control structure separately. That's certainly part of what we've been talking about. How can we better manage, have tighter controls, have more certainty on the flow rates and the amount of salt we can move back and forth. And certainly in the slow condition, the concern has been how do we prevent the North Arm salt from coming into the South Arm, and how can we perhaps export salt to the North Arm? And I think when the lake was at a higher level, and I think we need to be optimistic that we can get the lake up, and we need to consider, well, what happens if and when the lake does come up? How do we manage the salinity at that point? Because I think when the lake was higher, the concern was different. There we were concerned that the South Arm might be too fresh. We were exporting too much salt to the North Arm. So we need to, those are key things that will need to be addressed by the flow control structure. But I think more importantly, I think with the long-term salinity management plan. But I guess I wanted to open it up for discussion for you all to see what you think some of the key questions are that we need to make sure we address in the upcoming meetings.
So I'm sitting here just thinking about who is keeping track of where that interface through the berm would be as conditions change. And are we keeping the berm high enough so that we, assuming we still don't want the south flow, are we keeping the berm high enough to prevent that?
At this point, it seems
right.
You're pretty safe for a while.
Okay.
And from what they're projecting, the lake is going to go up. I don't think there's any chance to appreciable. Might have a trickle occasionally with windstorms. Not a whole lot of it.
So is your keeping track where
Well, we have a way of figuring out where the interface is, and some has another way of keeping track, and his is hydrodynamic. So it changes with the flows. So we all have different ways.
But you're not concerned about it at this point?
I'm not concerned about it. Not for this year. One great thing is we're having a decent year after a big year. So for decades, we had, patterns persist for a while. For decades, where every time we had a monster year, we just had a crap year the next year. And this year we're having a pretty decent year after a monster year. And so it kind of indicates to me that we may be getting out of drought. Whoa! And we're preparing all these plans for the drought. And what you have to do, see, in order for you to change the future of the lake, you have to do something like create the pumps. Suddenly the lake goes down. Now we've got all this stuff in place for addressing the drought. So I probably that will go up.
The theory that the gods are working against us, so all you gotta do is before effort, the direction you go with it, it will come to you.
Yeah. So Ryan, your team is measuring, how frequently do you take measurements where you'd be able to detect any return flow from a north arm?
So you can speak to the.
Yeah, we, during the runoff season, we're out there every month getting water quality profiles. So we can get that pretty routinely. Just looking at, we'll be able to see that answer exactly where that interface is each month. And after, outside of runoff season is every other month that we're monitoring that. And just given the head difference, I mean, the physics are such that it's just all going to be good. Yeah, I haven't seen it in a while.
I think one topic that would be helpful, I don't know if we can solve that here, is how you can prevent the stratification so that you can control the lake better if you don't have that. And all kinds of things. And there are ways of doing that. We haven't ever really investigated how that can be happening. But that might be something to do. And then, the wave action that screws up that, I had an uncle that had built several wharfs out on the California coast. There were big waves coming in. There was nothing inside. So there's ways of doing that, and you might want to get somebody from one of those coastal universities to help with that. You can totally dampen that out, and you don't have the rocks moving away around and things like that inside, if that's one of your concerns. Different flow control structures in salt saline systems. That would be, something that you don't have to blast out with dynamite. I've always thought maybe bladders of different sorts would be good, but then people laugh when I say that, so maybe that's not the right answer.
I think those are all good ideas.
Well, I think I'm just reiterating what you said in here. The berm is really a very passive system. It doesn't pump. It's all based on that differential head. If we're successful in getting the north arm up, we won't have any ability to move salt north. And so making sure that's part of that understanding, it's almost easier to add salinity from the north arm than to send more of the south to the north to control salinity when we're so we just need to make sure we understand, is there anything we can do, and what are our tools, and what do we want to do about it when we get to that close? I'm with Craig though. I think we should get to the other end of the problem. I like the lake level going up and the salinity.
So just a thought, but I think as we're talking about having a salinity management plan, and obviously that's going to interface with the comprehensive management plan that we're just kicking off. And so there's going to be a lot of different aspects of this, and I'd really like to have that salinity management plan as part of our CMP. So, finished within the next 18 months. I know that's probably a heavy lift for a bunch of volunteers that spend their time on this committee. But I think that there's a couple aspects to this. One, I think Bonnie made a good point last time that our charter is a little outdated. Some of the things that are on the charter have been done. Also, as we're looking at, where we go from here, perhaps that's the first step is to, take another look at our goals and our objectives in the charter, and also the makeup of this body, because there may be places where we're lacking now that we've learned a few things. Also, we know there's, limitations in who could vote, and some of the other things on here. So how do we structure that with non-voting members, other aspects of the discussion where we're missing representation, and then what does our charter look like? So I think that, in my opinion, that's the first step, is a new look at our charter, and then maybe mapping out what that salinity management plan looks like, because I do think there's things that we could probably do, like right now in conjunction with, how we manage the berm and the structure of the berm, and then things that are going to take multiple years to continue to investigate and refine information and understand better. So perhaps kind of looking at what do we know, what do we not know, what can we do now, what needs to happen later, and goals, and having a document that's semi-fluid and that we revisit from time to time. But that, again, I think the charter is probably the first step to make sure we're represented correctly. We know where we go from there. So that'd be my suggestion, is maybe the next time we meet, we come prepared with some revisions to that charter and then take another look at that. I don't know if anybody has any strong feelings about messing with the charter.
I agree, because we really, USGS, we shouldn't be voting. And I probably violated no, I haven't. But anyway, we do need to make the language more clear on who's a voting member, who's not. So, from our perspective. And I very much enjoy our role of being an independent science agency, just providing you guys the facts.
And I agree, and I think we would, like, from that perspective too, making sure that we have those non-voting numbers established, because some of that stuff is, like, the information that USGS brings is valuable. So making sure that we continue that relationship, and then also even dial in, like, maybe there's some things that we need to be doing too, agreement-wise, to make sure that we're monitoring and getting the frequency of monitoring that we need, so the Salinity Committee can continue to, make informed decisions. But I do think that having a little bit more representation from voting members would be nice, because sometimes it does seem like today, Craig had to make the motion to adopt the minutes, and I think usually there's like 2 or 3 people who vote sitting at the table, and then others online, and it'd be nice to get a handful to make sure that we're well represented.
That's a great idea. Any other comments on that?
I would just say that I was going to bring up the comprehensive management plan and how this would be a part of that management plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
critical.
Like as we're scoping this out, and there's a whole lot of discussions that need to happen on what the scope looks like, but we've already, selected a contractor and we're refining the scope now. And I think that from my perspective, as we're deciding, like making management decisions, collectively, we need to take into factors like lake level, salinity, and other things. And without having a salinity management plan, and maybe even refining that salinity matrix a little bit, like where do we go to make those decisions, and then how do they, relate into that? So I think we see a strong connection between these different strategic plans or management plans and how they are going to build into the CP.
Yeah, and you mentioned the salinity matrix. I know that was one thing that we had talked about last fall. I think we started looking at that before we decided we need to revisit the berm conversation again. And I think the discussion was that the salinity matrix, we wanted to better represent the aid the bird component in it, and make sure that we I think also the spring, the needs for brine shrimp in the spring are something that aren't necessarily very clear in the matrix right now. There's some things there and that feeds into the management plan. And that probably feeds in, I mean, that feeds into the CMP, but also probably feeds into the, how we operate the flow control structure.
Well, if the water distribution plan is based off of salinity and other aspects too, I mean, all of these things I think we're learning are so interconnected. So if we don't have a good understanding of salinity, how to potentially manipulate salinity and manage for that, then all of those other things are going to fail too. So I think this body is like, as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the more functional bodies that exist as it relates to Great Salt Lake, and where we can make some really big impacts.
Yeah, and you said how long for the CMP process? Like 18 months? Did you say?
They typically take 18 months. I would expect that the Great Salt Lake one will maybe take a little bit more time because we're also updating the mineral leasing plan. But with that said, maybe it'll go faster because so many people are engaged.
Right.
But we've a lot. I think the contract is 5 years, but we try to squeeze that into there.
Right. So how does that reconcile with the work of the Basin Integrated Plan, given the fact that now the lake is part of that conversation? And how will the comprehensive management plan reflect that?
Sure. I mean, that's like the challenge with everything is that, we've had the funding to do the Great Salt Lake plan now for, it'll be a year in July, but we didn't feel comfortable starting this with all of these different discussions happening. We had 513 and all these different aspects that are like, how are we going to plan during this time? But we can't wait till the basin plan is done to start our plan. So I think that we will do our best to, join those efforts and have them complementary towards each other. But I believe that the basin plan is largely focused more on, the basin and how they, get the water to the lake. And then there's components of that will, reference the CMP. And Laura, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but I think they'll be pretty good with each other, but not duplicative.
Right.
So.
Yes, I agree. Complementary is a good word.
So that would
I think there'll be updates to, some of the modeling efforts in the basin plan that could help with further understanding in the CMP, salinity management plans. They'll all be complementary. That's my hope.
And just another point too is I think they all have to be iterative, and we need to be able to, as we're learning new things. My goal with the CMP is that it doesn't take like a $400,000 appropriation to go in and modify it every time there's a little something we learn, but rather you have like a baseline document that can reference out to, different documents like the basin plan or the salinity management plan or, other aspects. So things can be modified, on their own, and we don't have to go through this massive undertaking to do that. So I found more fluid than they have been in the past.
Right. Good to hear. Thank you.
I just have a question with all these management plans. So how important are these forecasts going to be? Are there's a lot of management decision going to be made on here's our current condition and or is it going to be looking forward and trying to predict what is expected?
So I think it may be a little bit of a slippery slope to use forecasts until they're more refined and we have more reliability out of those. So my opinion on that, and I'd love to hear others, but my opinion is that we should be basing it off of like actual data, and maybe the forecasts help us to, understand what risks we may have. But until we can get this refined, I don't know that I would, hinge anything on a forecast. But I think that could be a goal, is that we get to the level of confidence in our forecasting that we can use it to make decisions. But I don't think we're there yet. And it sounds to me like you obviously agree that these are, there's a lot of hypotheticals. So.
That's a relief.
Yeah, but we do want to get there, Christine. That's like the next decade of your career. Right? Take these all down. Awesome. I hope Christine never leaves you to us. We're kind of like, we're heavily invested into Christine. So
and changed. My pleasure. Okay, thank you. That's great.
I mean, I think the trend analysis or those things are going to be super helpful, but to peg numbers is going to be difficult.
Well, it seems like every time you do one of these forecasts, there's little minor changes that have been,
Yeah.
where they've improved. And I think that as we dive into the salinity management plan and realize that the gaps that exist, and then also as we can model the, the breach and flows better, those are all things that will improve the forecasting. Hopefully we can get to that point, but it's going to take a minute.
I do think there are dynamics that we don't quite fully understand, and it's hard to incorporate into a model. So yeah, lots of refinements that's done, and also integrating with things like an NRCS forecast and bringing that actual what they think, what the amount of water they think is going to come. Like there's opportunities I think to integrate a lot of. I'm sure Craig has lots of ideas.
Well, anyhow, yeah.
So yeah, lots of improvements.
We're probably gonna have to do some long work sessions, like more than just a committee meeting. We're gonna have some long days of trying to make all these things connect and how they work together.
You mentioned the monitoring, because that is probably the first step is we're getting that data, and making sure that there's adequate funding for that, which is part of DWQ's your monitoring plan that you have with USGS, and that'll probably be linked to your limits in some way. So yeah, there's a lot of different pieces that we need to connect and have them work together. So, well, I think Ben, you had some great suggestions there on, I think at our next meeting to, revisit our charter and think about this committee's membership. How can we clarify, voting, non-voting, make sure we've got the right disciplines, right interest groups represented on this committee. And certainly this committee's wasn't intended to be have a science focus. So we wanted to make sure we had experts who are actively having expertise in the salinity of the lake. And I think there have been some topics that we've talked about that, we had to, and I think that's fine, to seek expertise from elsewhere. But I think just to think about how can we make sure that our voting recommendations that we come up with can capture that expertise adequately. So I think that'll be one key thing is to revisit the charter and membership. And then I think the long-term salinity management plan is going to be the other key thing that we need to jump into. And really think about, how can we move from this, crisis mode, reactive mode into a more proactive mode. And I feel like we have been doing that in the last year. This last fall, we were thinking proactively, hey, we're right at that threshold on our salinity matrix. Can we modify the berm, to try to build in some buffer, so we're not living on the edge. And so I think we have been moving towards that. I think that's the goal of the salinity management plan, is to really be able to provide some guidelines that can feed into the distribution plan, into the water quality aspects, to the VIP, CNP, etc. So I think in terms of meeting frequency, I wanted to get your input there as well. What your thoughts were on when we should meet next. I guess maybe before I go there, are there any other topics that you think are high priority? Does what I just summarized reflect what you're thinking too?
I have a question.
Yeah.
And this was, I guess because you asked me one time and I didn't have any clue what the answer was, but this sort of doesn't really have anything to do with salinity, but should we be able to model what the differences on the two different arms of the lake are based on management, or the size of the berm, or whatever strategy we have. So we'll know how or predict how the two different arms are going to be based off of whatever we do.
And John, I think just to answer that quickly, I think that the way this law reads, we'll have to do that. So 453 says that we have to have a goal within 2 feet of each other. So we'll need to be able to say, here's what we think is going to happen with every recommendation. So but I don't know, like Craig or USGS, I don't think that that's terribly difficult to forecast the north arm based on, like, if you can do the south arm, I think that the north arm kind of comes with it, right? It's just a matter of pulling those numbers.
Yeah, we're working on improving the models that we have right now. Like, for example, we're not really comfortable with the evaporation routines that we have there. We don't really haven't really tied down all the inflows to the lake. So lots of things are going to happen in the next couple of years. And then I think we'll have a tool that you can rely upon fairly well. Samdata has retooled the Holly algorithms that were created in the 1970s, and they'll be more appropriate for the trapezoidal openings that we have, and have a method that doesn't collapse every time you have certain Tyson conditions. So I think we're moving in that direction.
But just to maybe put a cap on that, I think like right now we know that salinity forecasting and even elevation forecasting, everybody's on shaky ground, even on the south arm. So we'll have to use the best information we have to be able to say, like, here's what we think would happen, and this is why we're making our recommendation, and we look over it and use that and say that's the best we can come up with. But then we'll have to modify that as we learn new things. But I think that we'll use the best information at hand to be able to do that. So,
and hopefully we'll have better forecasting methods.
yeah, so true.
I'll be really surprised if we come in to 1.2 the NRCS recommends, because there's so much variability out there. It's hard to peg it pretty close.
You mean you think it's going to be a lot more?
More or less. My guess is it might be less, but
Should we all publicly make our guess right now?
and we can all make fools of ourselves.
Yeah.
So in our office, we have our hydrology modeling section, which is always cast boats into the pool that Laura creates every year. And it seems like the more techie of us haven't won that pool yet.
They're the biggest losers.
They're the biggest losers, absolutely.
Well, I have a personal bet with Georgia Clayton where it's going to go, so I'm not going to state what my guess was, but it's a lot different than this. So. Anyway,
Would you say higher or lower?
I will definitely higher, but I also am very optimistic. So.
Well, it all depends on, right now there's a 3.3 foot difference, and we've maintained that despite have 1,500 cubic feet per second flowing to the north. It's just stalled. The north is not rising. And as we go up, if you eliminate some of that, actually that'll kind of stall the south arm some. So,
well, I think Jordan's prediction, he just assumes a continuous lake surface.
Yeah.
So he's pretending like there's no berm for his.
Yeah, when we start hitting 3,000 CFS coming in on the bear, and we're limited to 1,500 in the breach.
Right. The other thing to keep in mind is we have the lakeside breach, right? That's all the way over by the west edge of the causeway. And we're going to start seeing flow, as the south arm continues to come up, we're going to start seeing south to north.
4190.
4193, there's a little flow there. We can't gauge it just yet, but we're watching really close. So yeah, when we are able to gauge it, I'll share the
I
data.
have a question about the current berm structure. Since it's got a notch eroded in it, are we planning on monitoring whether the current runoff season is going to worsen that, change its geometry, and essentially change the way the berm is functioning?
I mean, we'll be out there every month getting discharge measurements, getting eyes on the berm. That's what I think we can.
But you know,
There's the
we don't
additional
have any,
bathymetry, there's a bathymetry effort that, is,
but we don't have any plans to do bathymetry between now and the end of runoff, I don't think.
No.
So I think the simple answer to that is that we potentially could go ask to do some bathymetry, but I think there's some challenges when it's running off and you have that big head difference. So I don't know that I would ask USGS to go do that again, because I think it was maybe a little bit on shaky ground to even get out there and do it before. But I think after runoff, it'd be wise of us to maybe look at what, you know, to try to reevaluate and see if there's an opportunity to do that.
So Ben, one of the things that'll kind of stall the way right now is you've got that 3.3 foot difference. And as it rises, you've got that almost 300 foot wide breach on the west end.
Yeah.
And it's starting to flow. And it can sustain a huge amount of flow with just a very low amount of head. So I think you need to revise.
Should we go plug that up real quick so I can get my lunch on Jordan?
I hope you haven't bet a lot of money.
It's maybe some type of beverage or something. I don't know.
But Craig, you're saying stall means level, just without gain.
Will not gain a whole lot, yeah.
And to Andrew's point too, like I think we also need to watch that because I know the north arm has a long way to go before it would start getting up to the point of that other breach, but I think that's another place that this committee needs to focus on efforts is like when we get to a point of 4193 and the north arm starts coming up, how do we ensure that we're not, you know, losing the ability to manage north to south flows even on the west breach as well, if we get to that point. So.
When we get to that.
Yeah, when we get to that point. And I will also say too, like a lot of us that were out there this spring that visited the site, there was a considerable amount flowing out from the west side of the lake that was going right out, you know, through that. So even when the north arm isn't high and there's not flows going over, we're still seeing an input. I would imagine it's a relatively small amount of difference on salinity, but it's something that if we're really managing for salinity, those are little things we could do to maybe have an impact. So
Great, well, good discussion. In terms of our next meeting, I know we typically meet the fourth Thursday of each month. Next month is April. I know in May we have the Great Salt Lake Issues Forum. You think it's worth meeting again next month or wait until June?
can I suggest that we meet post runoff? So maybe the later part of June, and then in the interim, those who are willing to help with that scope of work, you know, on the flow structure, can spend a little bit of time on that, and I'd be happy to organize if you all just let me know that you're willing. And then perhaps Jeff, maybe you and I can take a crack at like addressing some questions in the charter and sending it out to the group so we can use the time we would have spent in the meeting to focus a little bit of energy on some edits to bring back in June on the charter and that's work.
Does that sound okay, everybody? I think the fourth Thursday is June 27th. Is that anybody for online? So Bonnie added a comment there in the literature on the mega drought does not predict the drought will go away. However, the mountains certainly make our area more unpredictable. And I'll add an exclamation point. Well, let's plan on June 27th then.
Same time, Jeff?
Same time. Let's see if we can.
I'm asking about Soldier Hollow, so y'all don't have to walk out here, but no promises.
We'll get that on the agenda. And then I think a couple action items. If you have an interest in working with Ben on the flow control structure, please email him directly on that.
Or please do, even if you're like just relatively interested. I really could use some help.
But please just respond to him.
Please.
Or you may have to told people.
I may just have to. We may end up with a pretty subpar word.
And then I think, Ben and I'll chat about the charter. If you have any thoughts on that, please let us know, but we'll take a first crack at that, or at least highlight some areas that we think should be, that we should discuss at our next meeting. So, and hopefully in June, we'll have a great story to tell on lake levels and salinity, and
We'll see who's accurate and who's not.
Yeah, we'll see who wins the bets.
March Madness.
Yeah.
Would it be useful to, there are so many articles that the collaborative is generating on Great Salt Lake. And I know a while back, there was one on the berm, but I was just wondering if something that's a little more current might be useful, just to let the public know that there is a lot of thought going into this. And obviously we heard from NRCS, the prediction. I don't know, just a thought.
So I would maybe say, or suggest that if we can get that scope of work written in quick time, maybe even get that on the street, that might be something that's like a little bit sort of even say, we're doing a scope of work. Here's where we're at on salinity, maybe glean off of like what DWR did in their press release about Ryan Trim and some of the benefits, and then perhaps talk about, where we think we may end up this summer and really how effective, the berm has been, and then where we go from here and the efforts of the committee to create that salinity management plan. But I'd be willing to work with our PIO to come up with maybe like a joint release that we do with several folks that are, within the DNR umbrella.
Great.
I think that's a good idea.
And thank you all so much for your support of the Great Salt Lake Issues Forum. And I look forward to seeing you. And, it's one of those highlights every 2 years that gives us an opportunity to really come together in a larger mass and network and communicate environment. So I really appreciate your support. Thank you.
thanks for ordering. All right, well, if there isn't anything else, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thanks. Second. Thank you, Andrew. I'll say aye. We'll take that. Thank you, everybody.